All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the, what is today? Today's Thursday, January 29th. Welcome to Government, Labor, and Elections Committee. We are joined today for several briefings. We'll hear first from Mr. Rubenstein from the Department of Legislative Services, followed by Department of Social and Economic Mobility, and then a final briefing and presentation from the Department of General Services. As we are a new committee, and a lot of folks in this committee, this is their first time with a lot of the subject matter, so I please ask all of the presenters if you could refrain from using the alphabet soup, as we are all still learning what the acronyms mean. So with that, we will begin with Mr. Rubenstein. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. For the record, I am Michael Rubenstein. I've been with DLS for 20 years. For 19 of those years, I was the fiscal note writer on procurement. Last year, I was moved into more of a supervisory role, so I've turned it over to my colleague, Andrew Stover, whose name you will now see on the fiscal notes, but I'm still reviewing that work. And my goal today, I know there's a big disparity in sort of understanding of procurement on the committee. You have some experts, you have some people for whom this is new. My goal is to provide a very broad overview of procurement in the state of Maryland. It is, some of you may know it at the federal level, Maryland is very different. For one thing, we're the only state in the country that has a Board of Public Works, so that alone makes us unique. So my goal is to provide that broad overview. I can take each slide that I present and turn that into a 20-minute presentation. So this is going to be very general. Starting on the first slide, the procurement law is contained in Division 2 of the State Finance and Procurement Article, as well as Title 21 in the Code of Maryland Regulations, or COMAR. It's in both places. The statute tends to provide more of a framework, and the regs provide more of the specificity. A lot of things that you'll see today are actually in the regulations, not necessarily in the statute. There are roughly 40 entities that are exempt from state procurement law. Most of those exemptions are not absolute, so you're not going to see, like, for the most part, entire agencies that are exempt from state procurement. Sometimes it's a specific kind of procurement, or maybe it's one of their offices that's exempt for certain things. For instance, I'll give one example. DGS, which is Department of General Services, which is obviously the control agency for procurement. They are obviously not exempt, but when they procure things for the renovation of historic buildings, they have an exemption for that. So that's just one example of the kind of exemptions you're going to see. But there are some big exemptions, and that is the public four-year institutions and Baltimore City Community College. Next slide. The Board of Public Works is authorized to control procurement for state agencies. So they are the chief control agency. There are two exemptions from that in the statute. The first is for road and bridge projects by the Maryland Department of Transportation. That is fairly common across all the states. The reason for that is a lot of those road and bridge projects use federal money, and they have a lot of rules about how to use federal money, and we don't want to conflict and cause any kind of conflict between our requirements and the federal requirements. So we just exempt them entirely. The other one, which was just added a few years ago, is for this cybersecurity infrastructure, also exempt above $1 million. BPW is authorized to set policy. They can also delegate a lot of their authority, and that's actually what they do. They do that through the regulations. A lot of that delegated authority is in the regulations, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. So the first level of delegation is to control agencies. And control agencies are just that. They can control procurement by other agencies. And so there are two that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But most of that delegated authority is for procurements under $200,000. Everything else has to go through the Board of Public Works. Otherwise, the control agencies take care of that. However, the contracts for commodities are not subject to Board of Public Works, as well as banking and insurance. The limit for the threshold for the post-secondary institutions is a little bit higher. For the universities, it's $1 million, and for Baltimore City Community College, it's $500,000. Next slide. So the two control agencies right now are DGS, which, as you can see, controls pretty much everything except for what the state treasurer has, which is banking, financial services, and insurance. And we're going to talk about how that came to pass, because that was not, we used to have more control agencies, now we're down to two. The next level of delegation is the primary procurement units, and these are procurement units that can do their own procurement. They don't control other agencies, but they can do their own, again, up to that delegated amount. And again, you see it's MDOT, the universities, DGS, and the treasurer, obviously. Next slide. So procurement reform of 2017. This was the culmination of about 4 years of work, beginning with the Board of Public Works. We also published a report in 2014 that followed up on what the Board of Public Works did. And then Governor Hogan had his own procurement reform work group that issued a report, I believe, in 2016. And there was a lot of agreement in the different reports about what needed to happen. One of the biggest findings was Maryland was one of just 3 states in the country that did not have a chief procurement officer overseeing procurement for the state. And so that was one of the main things that we did. We also consolidated the control agencies. There had been several more. So we moved procurement of services from control of DBM, Department of Budget Management, to DGS. And we also moved control of IT from the Department of Information Technology also to DGS. So the DGS was really consolidated as the chief control agency. And then we also created the position of the chief procurement officer within DGS and moved personnel from other agencies to DGS so they had more staff to carry out their control duties. The other thing we found in our report was there was not a single personnel track for procurement. You had personnel doing procurement in DBM and personnel doing procurement in MDOT and personnel doing procurement in DGS, and they all had different grades and different titles, and so we created one track for procurement personnel to create more of a professional track for them. Switching now to the procurement methods. The most well-known method is competitive sealed bids. This is when you establish a certain set of specifications and then you award the contract based on what the lowest price is. This is one of my favorite quotes related to procurement. When Alan Shepard was asked what he was thinking about when he was floating around in space, this was his reply, that it was a sobering feeling to be up in space and have your safety determined by the lowest bid on a government contractor. Which leads me to my next point, which is competitive sealed proposals. This is when you want something else besides just price to be a determining factor in how you award contracts. I will hear sometimes people complaining about, oh, you awarded a contract, but it wasn't lowest bid. Well, for competitive sealed proposals, it's not necessarily going to be the lowest bid because what you're trying to do is award based on the best value or most advantageous to the state. Sometimes it's not always going to be the lowest price. On the next slide, we have a bunch of other methods. I'm going to focus on a couple of these. The first is the emergency procurement. This was a big deal during COVID. There was a lot of emergency procurement activity going on during COVID to purchase PPE and other things. There were some that were successful, some that were not. And so a few years after that, the General Assembly put some guardrails around emergency procurement to make it a little more, provide a little more oversight than what was currently going on, because at the time, basically, an agency could decide to do emergency procurement on its own and just say that they were going to do one and not have any oversight. And then the other one at the bottom, intergovernmental cooperative purchasing. This is a little bit controversial in the vendor community. There are 2 types of ICPs, if you will. The first is a cooperative where the state might come together with other states and create a cooperative to unify their buying power. And the other one is piggybacking. If the state has a contract, we actually do this with some contracts. I think cars is one example where if the state has a contract, the local governments can come in and use that contract to buy off of that contract. The key factor here is the underlying contract that you're using has to be competitively bid. If it's not competitively bid, you can't use it. But the vendor community views this as a way to get around competitive procurement, because if you find a contract that you like with a good price, you can just buy off that contract without going out to the market, and so the vendors don't like that. The next one is small procurements. Right now, the limit is $100,000 for small procurements. There's not a lot of detail in the statute about what a small procurement is. You have to go into the regs to get more detail. But basically, it's an expedited kind of procurement where you can just do more like oral solicitation sometimes if it's small enough. And then there's sort of different grades. I can show you on the next slide. We have 3 different categories, and the requirements sort of increase as you go up the scale. in terms of what a small procurement is. The key factor here is you can't subdivide a procurement into different parts to get down below the small procurement level. That's not kosher. Public-private partnerships, obviously the most famous one right now is the Purple Line. This is just a strategy that can be used to find a private partner who will essentially put up the capital in the front, and then on the back end, they get some of the proceeds from some or all of the proceeds. So it works for toll roads, it works for other toll facilities. As transit, it works for. Actually, the two rest stops on 95, those are public-private partnerships where the private partner built the facility and now they get the revenue that comes from people using it. There's a lot of approval process involved with the P3, as they call them, public-private partnerships. It goes through BPW a couple times. They are subject to minority business enterprise, but it's a multi-step process and very intensive. Preferred providers. This is another one that the vendor community is not crazy about. We do have preferred providers in the state. You can see them listed here, starting with Maryland Correctional Enterprises and Blind Industries Services of Maryland. And what the preferred provider program does is say if you're a state agency that has to buy certain things, you have to check first and see if they're available from these preferred providers. And if it is, you have to buy from them. If it's not, you can then go to the market. So again, some of the smaller businesses say, hey, you know, we can't compete with that. You're going to the preferred provider first. We can't compete with that. There's some upset about that too, but this has been in place for a long time. There is a pricing selection committee that determines pricing for these folks. MC determines their own pricing, but basically the rule is in statute the pricing has to be close to market rate. Actually, a lot of the chairs I think you're sitting in were made by MCE. The Minority Business Enterprise Program. This program requires a goal to be set for the use of minority business and women-owned businesses. Right now, the goal is 29%. That was set in 2014. It's supposed to be reviewed every 2 years. It has not changed since then. The program is up for renewal. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but my understanding is it's probably still not going to change. The program is governed by a Supreme Court decision from 1989, the Croson decision, that basically says if you're going to use a race-based preference program, it's subject to strict scrutiny by the court. It has to be serving a compelling interest that must be based on evidence of past discrimination in the marketplace. That's been interpreted to mean that we have to do a disparity study every so often that shows whether the availability of minority and women-owned businesses is different from their actual use in the marketplace. The most recent disparity study was just completed in, I believe, November, and it did show a disparity, as they all do. And so we expect that to serve as the basis for the renewal that's coming up. Also, the remedy must be narrowly tailored and include race-neutral measures. Quotas are not allowed, and we've seen some legislation in the past proposed that did try to set some quotas. That is considered unconstitutional to actually set a firm quota. That's why the language says it's a goal, not a quota. And so you have to be very careful about whether you actually impose any penalties for not reaching the goal. One thing I'll say about the 29% goal, that's a statewide goal. It doesn't mean every contract has to be 29%. It just means the goal is we're trying to get to 29% for the whole state. So some contracts may be higher, some contracts may be lower. There's a whole process for setting a contract goal that looks at the availability of MBEs in the community and in that particular industry. So you will see a lot of contracts that maybe aren't 29%, but the goal is to get there. You can see the most recent number we have for fiscal 24, it was 29.95%, which is the highest I've seen in about 15 years. We were typically around 17, 18% for a number of years. We did do an evaluation of the MBE program for DLS back in 2021. The biggest finding from that, so that 29.95%, that's based on what the vendors say they're going to do when they get the contract at the time of contract award. One of the things we did for our evaluation is we looked at completed contracts to see what the level of MBE participation was when the actual contract was done, which is not reported anywhere else. And what we found is basically about half the contracts did not meet their MBE goal that they said they were going to. So the actual participation rate for MBEs is much lower than that reported level because a lot of the contracts don't meet their goal. And so we made some recommendations. There were some changes made to try to beef that up. The creation of the MBE ombudsman was part of one of our recommendations that was done recently, and some other things. Small Business Reserve. This is a self-certified program. For the MBE program, there's a very long and involved process where you have to give them all your business documents and tax forms, et cetera. And it can take a while. For the Small Business Reserve, it's all self-certified. You just have to say that you're a small business and when you sign up for it. The current statutory goal is 20% of contracts being given to small businesses. It is a set-aside program. And right now, under the Procurement Reform Act of last year, that there was a requirement put in. It had been $500,000, but now any contract up to $1 million has to be set aside for the Small Business Reserve. Right now, again, from fiscal 24, the participation rate was about 10%. For SBR designated contracts, in other words, for the actual set-asides, it was only about 2.5%. So that's telling you that these small businesses are actually winning some contracts where it's an open competition because the participation level is much higher than just for the set-asides. Next slide, dispute resolution. All disputes related to procurement have to go before the Maryland State Board of Contract Appeals. They handle two different kinds of cases. One is a bid protest, which means basically you don't like the way the procurement was done or you don't like the way the contract was awarded before the actual contract is signed. So you file a bid protest. The other one is a contract claim, which is once the contract is signed, there's a dispute between the state and the vendor, and that has to get settled. By the way, the first report that I mentioned back that BPW did found that Maryland has a much higher rate of litigation related to procurement than most states. It's actually gotten worse. We actually had to expand the number of judges for the Maryland State Board of Contract Appeals because their caseload was so big. So they had been a three-person panel. Now they have two three-person panels to handle their caseload. So, you know, I don't know why it's so litigious in Maryland, but it is. Now, their decisions, once they make their decision, is subject to judicial review, so they can go to the courts. That doesn't happen very often. And by the way, the rate at which the decisions are issued, the state prevails in about 90%, 95% of the cases. So even though there's a lot of litigation around procurement, most of the decisions do find in favor of the state. And finally, I'm just going to cover a few issues that you're probably going to come across this session. The first, as I mentioned, the MBE reauthorization is coming up. I know there is a bill in the works. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, except to say that there has been a lot of activity in the courts and also in the new administration around federal minority preference programs. They don't affect the MBE program directly, but I think we're going to start to see maybe some spillover effects into how the state manages its program. I'll let Dosum talk about that some more. We talked about exempt entities, about 42 exempt entities. There was an audit by our Office of Legislative Audits that came out, I think, in November that found that a handful of those exempt entities did not have the written policies that they're required to have, and even a few more that did have the written policies didn't have all the elements they're supposed to have. I know that the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee was kind of upset by these findings. I don't know if there's going to be legislation about that, but I know there may be some interest in looking at some of these exemptions that are out there. They've been growing. A few more have been added in the last few years. Third thing is the implementation of the Procurement Reform Act from last year. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail because DGS can cover that. The one thing I will point out, there was a provision added in that legislation that required non-construction contracts to use apprentices and interns. We do have some language in current law already, or we did have for construction contracts to use apprentices. This provision required non-construction contracts to use apprentices and interns, but it was left to DGS, the Chief Procurement Officer, to designate covered contracts, covered procurements, about what kinds of contracts were going to be covered by that provision. We haven't seen that yet. I'm sure they'll talk about it. But I know there's some concern about this provision because the vast majority of apprenticeship programs are in the construction trades. They're harder to find in the non-construction trades. I know the IT community is very concerned about this. So we're waiting to see exactly what gets designated, because that may be disruptive to the procurement process if firms can't find enough apprentices to carry out their requirements. I did mention the procurement reform of 2017 did move Procurement Control Authority for services from DBM. They were fine with that. They actually, I think, are happy they don't have to do that. It also moved IT procurement control from DO-IT to DGS. They're not so happy about that. They've been trying over the years to get it back. There have been some efforts, particularly originating in the Senate, I think, to give them back their control authority. There is a work group that was set up in some legislation last year that Delegate Kerr is co-chairing, that met over the interim, did a lot of important work, great work. I would encourage, they decided because of the shuffling of membership, because of the shuffling of the committees in the House, not to issue any recommendations this year. They're going to meet in the interim again and come back with a program, I think, next year. If you do see legislation coming over from the Senate, I would encourage you to hold off until Delegate Kerr's work group can get you some recommendations next year, because they're looking at it more holistically than just looking at the procurement authority. And I think a lot of the things that DO-IT might want can be achieved without messing with that procurement authority. And then finally, you did hear a couple of bills on Tuesday regarding contract modifications. I think there are some opportunities there. They went to the Senate last year. The Senate asked DLS to do an interim study, which we did. Andrew actually worked on it, along with Lindsay Rowe, for those of you who know her from HGO. They did a great job. They had a lot of good recommendations. I would encourage you to consider that, the contents of that letter, as well as the fiscal note. I think there are some areas, based on the testimony I heard, where maybe some of the language can be tightened up a little bit. For instance, I know there was testimony that the intent of the bill is to provide an equitable adjustment in the case of when state law changes. The bills as introduced don't say state law, they just say changes in law. One of our concerns is that could mean a lot of things, including, for instance, tariffs at the federal level. And so, that's one area where maybe the language can be tightened up a little bit. There may be some others, but to meet the intent of the legislation. And that's what I have. You have our contact information. Like I said, we can dig down into any of these topics as much as you want. We're always here. We're happy to answer questions. Thank you for the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for the presentation. Delegate Chisholm.
Madam Chair, thank you for the presentation. This is my 8th year with government operations, and procurement can't get any sexier than this, I'm done. But I do have a question. You were talking, MBE's been in front of us all 8 years. And it's my, I guess, analysis is two things happen. One, they just can't find the companies to meet it. Or two, MBE gets frustrated with the whole bureaucratic process and can't meet the standards. But you said that of the vendors that were awarded contracts, you went back, they said they're going to use 29% or 30%, but only half of them did it. Did they give you any indication, or did you do any analysis on why they couldn't meet that threshold?
No, there are legitimate reasons why they can't. Sometimes, again, availability, sometimes an MBE will drop out. There are some legitimate reasons, but I think the fact that half of them didn't do it probably speaks to, and we did some focus groups with MBEs and some prime contractors, and we did hear a lot of stories from the MBE community about, hey, I was put on this contract, but they never contacted me, or they never gave me the money they said they were going to. They never gave me the work that they said we were going to. So there's a lot of things going on there. That's why we recommended the MBE ombudsman, because a lot of these vendors told us, hey, when I have a problem with my prime contractor, I don't know who to go to. So we said, let's create one person they can go to. But there's a lot going on there. I think it's even going to get more complicated now with some of the changes we're probably going to see. But no, we didn't really dig, because what we did was we just looked at the audit reports from the contracts and sort of summarized whether they met or didn't meet. But that's all we had.
Yeah, I've really asked because, Wallet Hub just ranked us as 49th state in the country to start a business. And just like you were speaking to apprenticeship, it's you know, to be in business, the toughest things now are capital and people. People just don't have enough people come through. Anne Arundel Community College does a great job with their apprenticeship programs, but we're just lacking people. And so I asked that because I was curious if we just don't have enough MBEs out there right now.
I mean, it definitely varies by area of the state, and that's one of the challenges, because when you set the contract goal for an MBE for a contract, you have to consider what's the availability where the work is going to be done. And if you're in Western Maryland or Eastern Shore or whatever, the availability is going to be a lot lower than Baltimore City. So that's why you see the variation in the goals for the contracts.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Fisher?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So this is new information for me, and my question is, per the bill that we did here, or bills that we did here for contract mods, can you give an example of, like, without giving a specific contract, but an example of why something would have to be modified? Because presumably, I ask, because presumably there's an RFP, companies respond, a winner is chosen, there's a scope of work, and I'm trying to figure out how the scope of work changes mid-contract so that a mod is required. I know what a change order is. I understand that that's construction and stuff like that primarily, but is there something outside of construction that would apply to?
So, I mean, the issue with contract modifications is a lot of these contracts are multi-year, and so conditions can change over time. Things happen. This is a testimony, I think, that we heard where, hey, if there's a new law that requires a new kind of benefit, that can increase costs. One of the things in one of the bills was about collective bargaining. Well, the state's not party to the collective bargaining, so if a vendor experiences collective bargaining and that causes their personnel costs to go up, why should the state be on the hook for that necessarily? But no, there are legitimate reasons for contract modifications. They are supposed to be mutually agreed upon. That's it's actually language in the statute. They are mutually agreed upon. If a vendor has an issue and they can come to the state and said, hey, my costs go up because of this, or I didn't, you promised me this and you didn't deliver, so can we change the contract? That has to be mutually agreed upon, negotiated, and then signed. And
so you're saying one of the mods that could be required would be a result of policy changes mid-contract, but policy changes by this legislature mid-contract.
Right. And what I heard was the intent was for changes in state law, but the wording in both bills that you heard, it just says changes in law. So it could be federal law, it could be anything. So that's one area where I think maybe it could be tightened up a little bit, but.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Delegate Lehman?
Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. So I have two questions. I hope they're quick, but the first is about MEDCO, the Maryland Economic Development Corporation, and wondering where they fall under state procurement rules. Are they under the umbrella of public-private partnership or what?
I don't know very much about them. I don't think they're part of the procurement.
Okay. If you could
framework.
follow up
I could
for me,
definitely follow
that would
up
be
with that,
helpful. Yeah, they built a bunch of buildings at the University of Maryland College Park a few years ago, and there were problems around COVID and the shutdown of the campus, and there were parents. A lot of my colleagues remember that we're on the hook for, for continuing to pay for their kids who lived in these MEDCO dorms, and unbeknownst to them, they were different than university-built dorms. So I appreciate insight into that.
Sure.
And then my second question is about the mention of this Senate request for a study of, change orders or contract modifications. Has that occurred yet, or is that in the works?
Yes, we completed. So Andrew worked on that with Lindsay. We delivered that letter in early January. I think it might have been in your bill packets with the bill.
Okay, I didn't see that.
Yes, we did deliver that to the relevant parties.
Okay, I didn't see that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Terraza?
Don't touch the button. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. So if this is a complicated question, I can ask it offline, but I'm trying to understand why there's so many exemptions to procurement law. Is there like a general answer to that, or is that something I should just call you and try to understand better offline?
The most recent one was for Maryland Corps, when the governor came in and established the service year option, he created an exemption in statute for the Maryland Corps program. That was a new one. It's just, you know, it has to be statutory. So typically it comes about when an agency has complications that maybe their specific kind of procurement they're trying to do doesn't fit within the framework that we have in the state, and so they ask for an exemption, but it has to be statutory. So there's a long list in the statute of all the exempt entities.
Okay, so that's where I'd see a list. And then the audit that you're talking about, is that from December last year, or is it? Or
November, December for the exempt
for
entities,
2025?
Yeah.
Okay,
25, yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Tomlinson.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the 60% rule?
Yes.
That's in the statute? Could you explain that? And then also, I really don't know the answer to this. Do you know the history on it, or why the origins of that? I know you said you've been here for 20 years, so I thought maybe you knew the.
I don't know the history.
Okay. I don't either.
I mean, basically, it just says for MBE, you can only count 60% for suppliers. I don't know why they distinguish between suppliers and all the kind of other work, but if you're a supplier, your participation in a contract only counts for 60% of your participation in the contract.
Yeah, I've never.
I don't know the history of that.
I would love to see that go away.
That's one of those
really
things that I could
make
cover in
any
the
sense.
30 minutes on MBE, but yeah.
I don't know why we look at an MBE supplier less, why they're any different than an MBE who provides a service. But yeah, it complicates things, and
Sure.
I'd love to find someone who knows the origins.
I mean, there's also the rule about if you're a prime on an MBE contract, your participation only counts for half of the goal. So, if you're an MBE and you get a prime contract, you still have to get a subcontractor who's an MBE to complete out the goal. So
that also doesn't seem
Yeah.
very fair. Thanks.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. And just a reminder that we have a hard stop at 1:45. We will also be joined by 2 additional panels that will probably be able to provide additional information on some of the specifics around programs and I think other aspects of procurement. So I just want to remind that to the committee. Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question around the way that the state, that we handle the policy around liquidated damages. I'm just curious if you have thoughts on how we do it versus other states and whether we should be handling it differently.
So, I mean, the policy in the statute is if the vendor does not perform on the contract, the state is the vendor is liable for liquidated damages to the state. We looked into this for the MBE study that we did a couple of years ago, and we asked the question because, hey, if you're not meeting the MBE, that's a violation of the contract. That's a breach of the contract. Do you collect liquidated damage for that? And we got a lot of blank stares from agency people like, no, we have never collected liquidated damages for that. And in fact, it's very rare that liquidated damages are collected for any breach of the contract. It does happen, but very rarely. And I think the explanation we've gotten from agencies is we don't want to upset the vendor community because we might want to come back and have them do more work for us in the future. So and I know there's been legislation. Senator Lamb had some bills in a couple of years ago. I don't know if you were cross-filed on that, but to basically require assessment of liquidated damages, and I think that was resisted by the agencies for that reason. But the policy is they are liable for liquidated damages if the state wants to collect them. The state has never really shown the will to collect them.
Thank you. In your experience, are other states handling it differently, or is that consistent across the board?
I don't know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Vice Chair Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 clarifying questions on MBEs. With the 29% goal, that is in the aggregate, not by contract?
Correct. That is the statewide goal.
And then can you quickly explain the difference between a goal and a quota?
No. I mean, a quota is something you have to do. A goal is something you're aspiring to do.
Okay,
I think
close
that's-
enough. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee for really great questions. I want to thank Mr. Rubenstein, apologies for,
Nope.
I mispronounced your name earlier, and Mr. Stover for your presentation, for being here. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest in some offline conversations with you both. So thank you for your hard work and your wonderful
Thank you.
presentation.
We are here for anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we will transition to a briefing from the department, hearing from the next panel from the Department of Social and Economic Mobility. So if you all could come up to the table, good to see you.
We just had an speech to you.
Sure.
Set up for you.
Yep.
This one, right?
Yep. There you go.
All right, and and also just before you guys both get started, if you could just state both your names for the record, please, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Walter Simmons. I'm the Acting Secretary of the Maryland Department of Social and Economic Mobility.
Good afternoon, Nichelle Johnson, MBE Ombudsman with the Department of Social and Economic Mobility.
Well, thank you for having us today. We promise to keep it in timeline and not use the alphabet acronym soup. But the Department of Social and Economic Mobility launched officially on October 1st. I joined the agency on October 20th. And we've been diligently working to build out the infrastructure of the agency while also maintaining programmatic operations that we'll get into today. What we've done is establish, from an infrastructure standpoint, is incorporate our three, what we're calling our programmatic offices: the Office of Minority Business Enterprises, the Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs, and the Office of Social Equity. Well, also now, those came pre-staffed. We've been making additions following the executive order and some of the reports that have come out of that executive order to the staffing structure to streamline certification and some of those operations. What we did not have is the Office of the Secretary and the staff of the Office of the Attorney General. The Office of the Secretary is currently building out. We're happy that next week our HR director starts, so that should expedite some of our hiring and onboarding. We're also still working with DGS on staffing and office locations, but have figured out how to maintain in the time being. Also happy that 2 weeks ago, the Office of the Attorney General hired our principal counsel as well, and are working to that staff. The reason why that's pertinent is because 2 days after we established the Department of Social Economic Mobility, the Trump administration released an interim final rule that made drastic changes to the nation's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, DBE. Also, the Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. In this development and what we're looking in this fiscal year to develop the agency and meet the goals is 5 key focus areas. What you see is our organizational structure that's related to building out the offices, staffing, offices, badges, and things of that sort. Also, along with our operational structure. What are we operating? How does that look like? And really making sure that we don't move to an agency where those 3 programmatic offices are co-located. We want to make sure they're integrated and streamlined to ensure that what we're modeling from the business side and procurement and certification is supply and demand. The supply is a number of certified firms currently across all of our certification, over 10,000 certified firms. The demand is, what are the opportunities across the state-funded entities that these firms can apply to? There's been questions about MBEs and regionalism and what's available from DLS that they just mentioned. That's a key component. And so one of the things in our operational infrastructure is implementing regions. That implementation will allow us to really customize, look at the data, and say, what is the specific contracting opportunities and procurement related to NAICS code, but also related to the NAICS codes in a specific region. We know that Maryland, when you look at Western Maryland, the Shore versus Baltimore, Montgomery, and Prince George is going to be vastly different. We need to make sure that we're customizing our approach and our efforts and our analysis, not just from a statewide level, but really looking into a regional level so that we can meet the needs of the businesses participating in the certifications and our set-aside programs. Next is going to be integrating all of these offices' key performance indicators, but also modeling them into that greater vision that House Bill 1253 outlined and ensure that we can meet what we've always done, but also adjust and move forward what's in the future. In this is going to be a redesign of the programmatic manuals and things that we've done. Some of these manuals are more than 20 years old, but were updated in the last 10 years. What we'd like to do in the next 12, 15 months is update both the MBE and DBE manuals to ensure that the procedures and operations that are aligned with these programs align with the current markets. Our fourth phase is going to be going into stakeholder engagement. We need to tell the story of what the efforts that the state of Maryland is doing to ensure that every Marylander has access to work, wages, and wealth, and also hear back from these stakeholders of what they feel we can improve on, what they feel we're doing great at, and even whatever questions they may have. We're executing that through something called Voices of Maryland. Our 6 priority areas in this stakeholder engagement is meeting with the 23 counties in Baltimore City, specifically also talking with the procurement offices, then going into our economic development agencies or economic development organizations. Number 3 is our major chambers of commerce. We say major because there are a lot of chambers of commerce, and we have a limited amount of staff, so we're going to work our way through. Also going into our institutions of higher education, as a leveraging point and focal point to what we're trying to achieve, trade associations, and then also financial institutions. When we say, why are we doing that, as the Delegate Chisholm mentioned, is because the 2 biggest things that we see, and in my background from working in economic development and workforce development in Maryland, is businesses always need capital and employees. So we don't want to create this system, and there's a report due to you all in July, just based on the data that we have. We want to make sure that the report that is submitted is inclusive of not only the businesses and the residents and the communities, but all 6 of those entities that are coming into this, what we consider an economic mobility ecosystem. And that's the final phase here, is how do we model what was outlined in House Bill 1253 of ensuring every Marylander has access to work, wages, and wealth by asset mapping these social equity programs for not only Maryland businesses, but Maryland residents. We've also added in Maryland communities because we know geographically where you're located, where your business operates from, is indicative of your financial prosperity. So that's where the regionalism comes in. And ultimately, we feel like these efforts, the report that we're submitting in July, and our Voices of Maryland will lead to the construction of an economic mobility ecosystem. The organizational chart, as we've outlined, of course, is our office, the Office of the Secretary, that I'm leading. We also still have our Special Secretary, Secretary Martinez, that is leading our 3 offices. Our Chief of Staff, Lord Gutierrez, is leading the efforts in the Office of Secretary, which is really a lot of our admin, back house operations, and then the Legal Counsel and Office of Attorney General. And I'm happy not only having Nichelle next to me, we've also, in the restructuring that came out of the executive order and the procurement reform, and the subcabinet, socioeconomic procurement subcabinet, is streamlining our operations. There was assessments done. We're working with DGS, which I know you hear from, and Emma and the consultant KPMG. We're also working with MDOT in a previous assessment before DOSIM launched on streamlining certification processes. Outside of that, you'll see on the bottom of your screen, we've moved, and moving into the supply and demand model, we're moving the kind of direction of OMBE to really focus on small business competitiveness. What is the purpose of getting a business certified? The purpose is to increase the ability for them to participate in contracting so they can increase their revenue, increase the tax base, and also increase the number of employees. So instead of saying, hey, you're certified, you're not certified, and a rubber stamp, we really want to focus on that competitiveness. So that's where you see this new administrator is the Small Business Competitiveness Administrator. On the Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs side, that's the demand and opportunity. We really want to make sure that we're focusing not on working with the state-funded entities that have these goals, but also what does it take to reach that goal? What are the barriers the procurement officers are seeing? What are the questions that are being answered? Not only working with our MBE ombudsman, but also going into the private sector as well of how that's helping the businesses. So you see that new administrator is the Economic Opportunity Administrator. And as of the last week in December, both of those we had filled with acting roles from internal staff. And then working with our Office of Social Equity has been leading our cannabis work. We also want to eventually see, and you'll see in the recommendations, what does the social equity look like, not just in the regulated cannabis industry, but what does it mean across the state of creating an inclusive economy where we can work to increase our tax base. So that's kind of how we're formulating. Again, the biggest hurdle that we've had is just being new and getting onboarded. But again, that HR director and team starts next week, and they will be very busy filling those vacancies. In our OMBE effort, when you're looking at the chair, as chair stated, there's some new conversation here, new people to this conversation. We've kind of formalized our supply work into really 6 core certifications. The Office of Minority Business Enterprise is leading 4 of those. One is the state certification, which is the Minority Business Enterprise, and then 3 federal certifications. The Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, Airport Concession, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, and our Small Business Enterprise. So that is why we're focusing OMBE. Office of Social Equity, we say there's 6 core certifications. I think as we formulate and you hear more of our office and you hear more from our team, we've really started encompassing and saying that, well, really there could be considered 8 certifications. What is that? It's when you look at and what we believe in the formation of DOSM, the Office of Social Equity, it has the licensing, the social equity licenses that they are also leading the effort on. We can group those as a business certification. You have growing, you have processing, and then you have your dispensary certifications, all right, your retail. They've also worked with micro certifications, so your micro grower, micro processors, and micro dispensary. So we said that OSC could be kind of that 7th type of certification. And then we go into the Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs. What we're trying to work through with our OSBA team is they are also a part of the supply because they have 2 certifications, which is your Veteran-Owned Small Business Enterprise, VSBE, and your Certified Small Business, which goes through Emma. They also work on the demand side. So one of the things that we're going to be discussing with our team is what does it look like if the certification if that certifications also go to OMBE? How does it change? What are the implications? How do we streamline data tracking? We've met with Do It. We've met with our contractor for the state's vendor management system, which is B2G, to really look at that. And ultimately, what we'll figure out is how do we make it easier for the state-funded entities to procure the businesses participating in these certification programs? How do we make it easier for contractors, subcontractors to report data? And how do we make sure that we can get reports back to the governor's office and the legislature? Right now in a bifurcated system, there's a lot of manual work, which means a lot of spreadsheets that we can't just export data to really relate to you all, get you data related to your districts. It takes an extenuated amount of time. So part of this supply and demand system also goes into data analysis so that we can not only expedite the data processing and then really go into the analysis to have more genuine impact. And when we understand that people might not meet their goals, it's not that what we're seeing in these conversations is not that they're choosing not to. It's that they don't have the data or it's hard to get access to the data. So that's what we're committed to. I've talked with Secretary Chaudhry as well at DGS to see how do we make this approach using a collective impact model. OSBA also does your demand side, right? And so part of the demand side that was mentioned from the previous briefing is your Veteran Small Business Reserve, VSBR set-aside program, and your Small Business Reserve set-aside program. So they're not only doing the certifications, they're working with your set-aside programs and working with your state-funded entities. I say state-funded entities and not agencies because that's one of the big items that we've understood in talking with the community. People think that their goals are related to government agencies. We're working to inform and include to also talking about our casinos. We're also talking about our institutions of higher learning. We're also talking about our school systems. So what you maybe have seen or participated in is going to be seeing 5 core categories of increased stakeholder engagement with our Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs. We want general open houses for state government so that everybody can understand the certification programs, the opportunities, the rules and regulations, and who participates. Those are what you call ready, set, grow. How do we grow your business? We've already started, they used to be held centrally. We've already started in the last 2 quarters moving out throughout the state. So most recently, we were at Ocean Downs and had a Ready, Set, Grow. We've had previously those at Anne Arundel County. The next one in March, we're working with Bowie State. What we want to see is we want to establish 6 regions that we're finalizing. Ideally, we want to see 6 Ready, Set, Grows every year throughout the state of Maryland. We want to also follow that up with more specific open houses with the 72 state-funded entities. We know we can't do 72 open houses per year, but we want to look at a calendar so that we can say at a certain time period, there has been an open house. Then we want to go into prime and subcontractor matchmaking. We also want to look at prime contractor matchmaking across the board. So these are the categories where we want to make sure each community member is aware and we can narrow it down. Departmental bills in closing that we're looking at in this legislative session is MBE reauthorization. That is going to be the big bill that has to be authorized because it will sunset on July 1, 2026. This is something that we're working closely with the government on, with the governor's office on, and executing. I would be remiss if I did not mention the federal changes to the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program and the interim final rule that came out when I started the presentation on October 3rd. The federal IFR stated that you can remove race and sex-based presumptions, which means that we used to be able to say if you were a woman, if you were a minority, you were automatically perceived as having social disadvantage. The interim final rule stated that you could not in whole or in part. There's a lot of conversation going on right now on what is the constitutional impact. Does that violate the Constitution? Does it not? And that's what we're working to right now. But the interim final rule and the precedent that is being used could also be used to look at state MBE programs. So what we need to look at in our MBE program is how do we determine what does it look like? And that's what we predict will be a big topic in this legislative session. Also, how do we ensure Maryland has over 10,000 certified firms across these different certifications. Around about 7,600 are in the DBE side, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, followed by MBE, our Minority Business Enterprise. So we know that these small businesses, minority businesses also make up a large piece of tax base and pivotal pieces to our economy. If we did lose, which is in the IFR, they talk about 10 to 20%, we could lose that many certified business. That could be devastating. Why is that devastating to Maryland? Because 18.5% of the country's DBE businesses call Maryland their home. So we are 1/5 of the country's businesses, which means if the federal government says that we could lose 1/5 of the entire program, that could be a heavy impact to the Maryland economy. And so this is why the MBE reauthorization bill and also monitoring the impacts that's happening federally is very key to the next steps in Maryland's economy and Maryland businesses, because a large percentage of Maryland businesses are impacted in that program and employ thousands of Marylanders. So it's something that we're focused on. That will be the conclusion of our presentation and open to any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Delegate Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It seems like it was just December 5th when you appeared before the Health and Government Operations Committee. Since then, something has come into my knowledge that I have a question about qualified minority business enterprises who are currently operating in the cannabis space before the Department of Social and Economic Mobility and the, I'm speaking specifically for the delivery licenses or permits. I don't know whether they're licenses or permits. Is it possible for an MBE operating in that delivery space to not be able to be certified under your department and that they would have to cease operating business by July 1?
Well, so from a ceasing business operations period, that the MBE sunsetting, if that's the correlation, doesn't mean they cease business operations. It means their certification and counting towards those goals. So they won't have to cease. I think regarding the MBE correlation to the delivery, I need to look into. I don't see the marrying of the two, but I need to look into that being well. But these programs sunsetting doesn't cease the operations. If it did sunset, what it sunsets is the procurement goals to get on contracts, but not the actual operations.
Okay, let me follow up with you on that, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Sample Hughes.
Thank you for being here today. You have a lot of information. I'm sitting here trying to keep up. So these are really quick questions for you. When you just mentioned the 18%, the DBE, and noting that Maryland makes up 1/5 percent of business around the country. Do you already have a map of what Maryland just looks like, where that 18% looks like, at what parts of the state is?
Not right now, but that's what we hope to develop in our regions. We're formalizing the regions now, and then we will then do a layover of the 6 certifications of where the concentration for each certification is located in each region.
Okay. Would that be before the sunset bill comes up, or you're just, your goal of when you'll have that?
It would be the goal to get it before.
Okay.
The reason why we're pulling the data is what we need to work on. We've already looked at the regions. That should come. We're hopefully putting that in front of the governor's office within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Once we really go through that process and approval, and considering it does get approved, then it would be actually plugging it in. I can't give you a specific timeline, but it is something we are working on every week.
Okay, all right, thank you on that one. If you could just elaborate on the Voices of Maryland, the stakeholder engagement piece. Is that just all electronic engagement that you're seeking, or are you going to small communities like mine and just trying to get more engagement as well?
It is the exact opposite. It is in person in each district, in each area, primarily on Fridays, but it is actually in person. If you delegate and anybody else has areas that we would like to touch, we will try to get them in that list. Michelle and other staff members are being driven around by me across the state. And so that, like Friday, weather permitting, we'll be in Chestertown in the morning, and then we'll end up by the end of the day back, hopefully somewhere in Montgomery County. Last week, we started in Dorchester County, and we ended up in Prince George's. So these are in-person visits. I think we also have tomorrow, Howard County is on the list as well. So these are in-person tours, visits. We are asking these population centers to bring in their stakeholders to engage as well. So it is in-person, primarily on Fridays throughout the state.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Tomlinson.
Hey, how you doing? Glad you brought up the outreach events. Ready, Set, Grows. I've been to enough to last me a lifetime, probably. It's with you guys now taking with the office being relatively new. I hope maybe there can be kind of a reimagination of how these events are held. As someone who's been to a lot of them, I feel like sometimes I didn't feel like maybe they were totally effective and that they were accomplishing their goals. So I'll talk to you offline. maybe we can try to change something up. Because I mean, there's a point. The intentions are good, but I don't know attending them if it ever actually follows through on what they're trying to accomplish.
Well, I think we could, looking forward to the conversation, I think we would agree, the staff agree, because they're like, what is the meat to the bone? And that's where that Ready, Set, Grow has been like an open house, kind of large scale, where it's hard to get tangible. And that's why we've added the 4 other categories to really start diving down into specific agency matchmaking events, prime and sub events, to really start getting people in the room. And true tangible outcomes. It's hard when you're trying to just spread out massive levels of information to get a tangible outcome. We still want to open that door to get the masses through the door. Also, the key thing is we want to get updated contact, updated the right people who might be listed on the certification is not actually who's doing the day-to-day contract bid work. So part of that is also getting to that contract bid staff members to get that. But I definitely want to have that conversation to get that, that stakeholder input and figure out how to really get tangible outcomes.
Yeah, the problem is that these are small businesses that are coming that are showing up to the tables and they're looking at a list of upcoming procurements, and they've got estimates of a couple $1 million, and they're looking at this list. They're like, I own a cleaning business. It's just me, and they're like, I can't bid on this $1 million contract or with an estimate of $1 million. These guys are really the better fit for them is to come on as a subcontractor to a prime. But obviously, the state agencies, they don't hire the subs, they hire, just the prime. So there could be some changes that I think could be beneficial to both the state and the small businesses who are looking for opportunities. Well, you and I agree.
No, definitely. And our chief external affairs is behind me. One of the new divisions inside of the office of the secretary is external affairs. And so Artie Kamali's here. Also, we have Davon Gardner, our policy and ledge director, and Eun Young Hung, our manager. So part of that reason is to directly engage and get that feedback. So I see Artie taking notes behind me. We'll make sure we follow up. But that external affairs, that's really, to highlight, that's one of the big things I'm excited about, is for those that don't know, Davon Gardner was one person chasing around everything for the last few years, so kudos to Davon. But now, through this structure, there's a team that is strategically being able to engage and really have meaningful conversations to get that feedback.
Thank you. Delegate Fair.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation. I really appreciate it. Just 2 quick lines of questioning. One I might have missed because unfortunately I had to step out for a minute. Were you able to talk about the geographical breakdown of how the MBE program spreads out across the state, especially like per capita around the state for the residences it represents?
We are creating regions. It should go in front of the governor's office in a couple of weeks. After that creation, we're going to do that geographical breakdown, and we hope to get it to you as soon as possible.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And the second is, one of my constituents reached out as a person that owns an OTB up in Frederick, and they're an MBE, as a women-owned business. They were trying to expand their casino licensing. I know this is very specific. They were trying to expand their gaming license to a larger program, and they were having all kinds of challenges being recertified as an MBE. Despite having the pre-authorization, pre-certification. Have you noticed that other businesses have trouble trying to expand inside of the MBE program once they're in it?
Yeah, we've seen it. There's multiple intricacies. One of those intricacies is the previous process. Part of the assessment we've done with MDOT is to streamline and remove those processes, which led to the reorg. There's also some information we need to get out there about the applications. One of the big things that's been holding up a majority of our state certifications is the previously combined application. When they submit that combined application, because of the DBE's halt, it halted the MBE applications. So we did onboard contractor at the start of the year to reach out virtually to every single applicant to ask to inform them of this and ask them if they would like to decouple their application or expansion application. Those that were not doing federally funded work, we can't make that decision, but if they do choose to do that expedited their MBE, there also could be some other intricacies. What I would say is if we could follow up with you offline to get that specific, we can provide follow-up. One of the other additions we've had to be more responsive in OMBE is create an escalation process that ensures that not only the firm receives feedback within 10 business days, but also the referring legislator can get status updates as we're working with that firm to provide additional context. So we can follow up, add that information, and ensure we'll work out through the problem-solving pieces. But one of the big things I would highly encourage when they reach out, if they did couple their federal application because of the federal government, that is on pause. So if they did combine it, unless they decouple it, their MBE application remains on pause as well.
Gotcha. So, but your office, I think, would be on board with looking at this holistically and figuring out ways, because minority-owned businesses that are trying to expand and grow bigger, we want to really kind of press the gas with them, because that's really a great opportunity to expand the amount of impact that we have on MBEs across the state.
Absolutely. That's what our ombudsman and the team, also our outreach team, is working on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I did have, I guess, one question. So as we were going through the presentation, I was just thinking, I know on the previous panel, there was a lot of questions about MBEs, but also just highlighting that there's a focus on women-owned businesses, small business enterprise, and veteran-owned business enterprises. I'm curious, from your vantage point, and I know you are, still settling into your shoes, but I'm wondering if you've noticed any preliminary overlaps of challenges with outreach, with certification, and engagement amongst over all of those various categories. If there's any initial observations, or do you feel like there's I know there's unique specific challenges, but I'm curious if you could speak to some of the broader reaching challenges that you would identify at MBE enterprises, veteran-owned enterprises, women and small business enterprises.
The overarching is information dissemination. A lot of times people get the certification, but they get so much information from state government, they don't know how to process it. So there's going to be that piece. The second piece is, especially with our smaller businesses, and the definition of small can vary, but is really having organizational capacity. I think as Delegate Fair mentioned, or Delegate Tomlinson, you're talking sometimes there might be one or two people. So how can they participate? One of the things that we've talked about from hearing from staff is really breaking through those intricacies of, is it financing? Sometimes it's computer literacy, it's having proper, it's what does it look like? It could be office location. So we're really working through, and again, not going from a certification standpoint, of really saying, we don't do computer literacy, we don't help you manage your office. But the reason for Voices of Maryland is we will be able to refer them to a business incubator, an office space, or some kind of mentoring program. We do have the mentor protege. That staff member starts next week to really start being able to, initially it was kind of like, oh, that's not our role. But now with the passage of the bill, those are all social equity programs that we want to match. But staffing, it's also just information and really process it. It's also just computer program. We get people, can I just mail you something? We're like, no, you can't mail us anything. But it's figuring out regions and who can we match them with to walk them through that process.
Thank you. If I just remind the committee that we are in a smaller space, so if folks could just refrain from some of the sidebar conversations, because it's easy to hear. And not you, Delegate Fisher, but you are the next person to ask a question.
Sure. He doesn't take any offense to any offense.
Thank you for being here. I apologize. I had a bill hearing, so that's why I wasn't here. I was just really curious with the MBE program about the kinds of businesses that you're seeing in the minority community that are the most common. So, for example, like what are the top 3 businesses that are maybe statewide that you're seeing there's capacity growth that you're seeing that's occurred?
I'll say it. Michelle, you want to answer that? She's a little more settled in her shoes than I am.
Thank you for that question, Delegate Fisher. I have to say that the main businesses that we see are in the IT industry. We get a lot of those businesses. We also get construction. and services industry, of course, which is one of the largest industries because it encapsulates so many businesses.
Yes.
So those are the three biggest that we see.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you both so much, Mr. Simmons, Ms. Johnson. Did I get your name correct? Yes, okay, thank you. I want to thank you both for your presentation. I know this committee is eager to continue to work with you all, excited for a lot of what you guys have on your docket in terms of expansion and engagement. So we really appreciate your presentation and look forward to engaging with you further. Thank you both. All right. Next, we will hear from the Department of General Services, Secretary Chowdhury and Mr. Sermons. Good to see you both.
All right, I think we're on now. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I am Lateef Chowdhury, Secretary of Maryland Department of General Services. Very happy to be here today and speak about our favorite topic, which is procurement. I wanted to first of all thank the committee and members here for their support of our various procurement bills over the years, and in particular, the passage of the Procurement Reform Act of 2025, landmark legislation to really move forward the Moore Miller administration's goal of modernizing and reforming state procurement. We are hoping under this administration to leave a legacy of modernizing and making procurement more easy to utilize across state government. Procurement is something which is certainly not easy to use, and it's always very frustrating across any level of government, whether it's state, local, or federal, because people want to buy things and they want to buy them fast. And there are all these safeguards put into place and measures to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. And our job is to look at the laws and regulations currently in place and how can we streamline those methodologies and policies and procedures in order to streamline operations to make sure that while we are continuing to safeguard the state's dollars and resources, we are still able to effectively and efficiently purchase goods and services for the state in a timely manner. So I have with me to my right Wallace Sermons, our Chief Procurement Officer. He'll go over a brief slide deck just to hit some of the highlights and talk about our Procurement Reform Act, some of our modernization efforts that we're doing right now, building on the building blocks that you've heard so far about the basics and mechanics of procurement.
Thank you, Secretary Chowdhury, and good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and esteemed members of the committee. I'm going to try to be brief. I want to hit some very salient areas, but obviously you might be tired from the presentations before me. I know procurement may be interesting in some effects, but sometimes it can be a bit tiring. So the agenda we're going to go over, we're going to talk about who the Office of State Procurement is. We're going to go into the Procurement Reform Act of 2025 that I know many of you are very familiar with, some of the outcomes and implications of that legislation, and then we'll close up with some key takeaways and discussions. So I want to first talk, and some of this is going to be a regurgitation from my colleagues, so I'll try to keep it brief. The Department of General Services, Office of State Procurement, we are the central procurement authority. We are also a primary procurement unit for most delegated procurements under the Board of Public Works, with the exception of the Maryland Department of Transportation and other statutory exemptions that were mentioned in the previous presentation. So from a leadership and organization standpoint, the Office of State Procurement is within the Department of General Services. That is led by Secretary Lateef Chowdhury to my left here. Both the positions, Senate-confirmed positions that are here to safeguard procurement under our authority. From an operations and support standpoint, agencies conduct procurements within their approved delegation. We do conduct compliance checks as an oversight mechanism for that. We provide review of their procurements over that threshold and guidance, and OSP ourselves conduct procurements on behalf of agencies either outside of their delegated thresholds or when there is a need for increased expertise. A lot of times you'll see that in the information technology support services space or for specific service contracts. So to add to some of the efforts that we do in regards to our procurement authority and policy development, we lead statewide procurement policy, the guidance and compliance for the executive branch. We oversee the acquisition of both goods and services. across several areas from construction and A&E, facilities maintenance, commodities, information technology, and professional services. From a contract oversight standpoint, we have strengthened contract oversight, and this is through one branch within the Office of State Procurement called the Office of Contract Oversight. And what we do is we provide contract management tools, templates, and different best practices. We most recently provided a contract management basics course, which is very new to the state. We had almost 300 participants, both from the acquisition space or procurement space, and also program counterparts to better learn what true contract management looks like. And via a survey, we had a remarkable outcome of almost 90% confidence rating based on that. We also promote inclusive and
Sorry, also, I just want to hit on contract management in particular. And I've been in state government for over 20 years. I will tell you that contract management has been the Achilles heel of contracting across state government. That's why very often you'd see contracts that would expire. Contracts would be retroactive. They weren't properly managed. So under this administration, under the governor's leadership here, doing these initiatives here, the contract management certifications, the trainings, is better to better monitor and manage our contracts across state government. So we're effectively monitoring them appropriately, not overspending our contracts, not randomly changing the scope that may be appropriate, and also making sure that we're not going into a place outside of the scope and being retroactive. So it's very, very important, I think, to highlight on those points that is not just going to make us spend money better, but more efficiently and better monitor the spending that we're doing. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, thank you for that, sir. And also in furtherance of that, as I talk about how we promote inclusive socioeconomic participation, one aspect of compliance and even the establishment of procurements, establishment of the contracts, is establishing goals for specific contracts. You heard earlier about the amount that the statewide goal is for minority business enterprise or for veteran small business enterprise, 29% and 3% respectively. That is accomplished through the procurement review group that sets goals for contracts based on the subcontractable elements for that specific contract at hand. Now, there was a conversation, I believe there was a question asked by one of the members in regards to liquidated damages. Well, I can actually add to that conversation and say for the first time in state history that we can recall, based on information even provided by the Office of the Attorney General, we actually have conducted liquidated damages, which you'll hear even on the federal side, that's something you don't normally find. Normally, something like that is coupled together through an action through the Department of Justice as a settlement. We've conducted liquidated damages to the tune of about $2 million, where we have converted to debt to CCU. So that's the first time for the state. And that amount is specifically for contracts that are managed by the Department of General Services. So I just wanted to add that because I know that was something that came up earlier. We manage statewide contracting and coordination. We administer statewide contracts to the benefit of not only Department of General Services, but for use around the state. Also master contracts that improve, we approve purchasing through the intergovernmental cooperative purchasing agreements. We establish them on behalf of the state and state agencies, and we coordinate actions for the Board of Public Works, which means reviewing the Board of Public Works entries and approving emergency procedures. Now, specifically on the Procurement Reform Act of 2025, which you'll hear referred to as the PRA, that was passed as House Bill 500. That was really establishing the framework for modernized state procurement or furthering our footprint in that direction. It was made effective of October the 1st, 2025, and many of those provisions has already been implemented and some are still in progress. And in the implementation of that, obviously it starts as statute, but is a multi-tiered process where after the statute is enacted, there are regulations that are promulgated by the Board of Public Works with participation and partnership through control agencies such as the Department of General Services, Office of State Procurement. There are then BPW advisories, so the Board of Public Works advisories, and then there's policy that comes out of the Department of General Services Office of State Procurement. The problem is the timing of that. Sometimes there's a need for policy before we have the regulations, which may mean that we have to issue policy to make sure that procurement officers have the information they need to be able to do their jobs when the law is enacted, where we'll make changes if the policy is contradicted by the regulations, we'll issue revised policy.
And to that point, just harp on the fact that the Board of Public Works controls COMAR regulations for procurement, so we've got to navigate that, which may, to Wallace's point, take a little more time. That's why we were working very diligently to implement those policies and procedures while regulations are being drafted and reviewed and promulgated by the Board of Public Works.
So I want to go over, and I know this slide is a bit wordy, but I want to let you know some of the impact of the Procurement Reform Act, some of the outcomes and implications. So the expansion of the Small Business Reserve Program, what that did is it removed the 50,000-foot floor, which was the minimum, and it increased the eligibility for contracts up to $1 million, which expands access to state contracts for certified small businesses and creates a more inclusive procurement environment. We've even added oral presentation requirements for large procurements, which it improves the evaluation process. You get to speak to not actors, but individuals that are actually performing on the contract. We've streamlined master contracting, which targets task order solicitations to a smaller qualified pool so that we can get to award in a faster, more efficient pace. This also reduces the administrative burden and shortens those procurement timelines, making these types of contracts, master contracting, more effective. We've done something huge here, which you'll find in the federal government, even at the agency and department level, in regards to workforce and supplier diversity plans, which will allow the state to require diversity plans for larger contracts. It increases the transparency and supports a more diverse and equitable workforce. We've corrected deficiencies in minority and veteran small business enterprise forms. This is something very new and has supported us with not only increasing the competitive space, but also ensuring that we have the best value on contracts. We're allowing for the correction of minority business enterprise and veteran small business enterprise participation forms. These are the forms submitted at time of proposal that states exactly the goals that will be reached. So now we can actually correct the deficiencies on those forms, which are normally just administrative challenges that in some instances has had the government pay millions of dollars more because a small error that can be remedied on a form. We have now the first ever Veteran Small Business Enterprise Reserve Program, which allows the state, specifically for agencies, the Military Department and the Department of Military and Veteran Families, to reserve contracts specifically for veteran small business enterprise. So it's basically veterans supporting veterans. We've also, to support the small business industrial base here in the state of Maryland, there was a provision put in to accelerate payments for small business reserve designated contracts that basically reduce payment timelines to 15 days. So instead of the net 30, it would bring it down to a net 15, which allows small businesses that normally have issues with access to capital to get paid sooner in the process. Now, covered contracts, I know that was slightly mentioned earlier as it relates to internships and apprenticeships. What we have is a provision that would require for covered contracts over $1 million to require apprenticeships or internships. As of right now, we're still working on the regulations for that, but we have held public meetings in January, and even the information technology firms have stated they don't have an issue. So we're still trying to work this out. With any regulation, we want to know, or any law, as we promulgate the regulations, we want to know exactly how it's going to affect the vendor community in different sectors, so we can make a determination on what contracts would be considered covered contracts. In that same vein, the good labor practice is it adds a scoring practice for contractors that commit to ethical labor practices, including proper employment, wages, and safety. So that is more from a compliance standpoint, but it is a part of it would be a part of the evaluation process for our capital contracts. So in closing, I want to mention, and wait for some questions here, OSP serves as the Maryland Central Procurement Authority. We have been modernizing procurement. One of the key landmark bills is that Procurement Reform Act. We're updating policy for consistent procurement policies across all of the subordinate agencies, and we have implementation in progress. So there are many things that have been implemented, but some things remain in progress, and we are steadfast to make sure that we enact every law that is passed in that piece of legislation. So I stand by for any questions the committee may have.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to go back and clarify, Secretary Chaudhry, I think it was your comment. I think it was on the slide that kind of laid out the PRA implementation. But if you could just clarify the comment, I may have misheard you. You mentioned, it sounded like you made a comment around BPW has some regulatory so could you just clarify that? Because I got a little.
Sure. I just want to make sure it was clear for the committee. So while the legislature enacts law, the regulations, typically regulations for DGS would be managed by Department of General Services. Procurement's a little bit different. So the procurement regulations are regulated by the Board of Public Works. So while DGS coordinates with Board of Public Works staff on it, the Board of Public Works themselves must, so the Comptroller, the governor must work to approve the any regulatory changes when it comes to procurement regulations.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Delegate Crutchfield.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I have two questions for you. One is about what you described as diversity plans. Are those similar to what the federal government does in federal contracting with affirmative action plans, or what do diversity plans really do?
Thank you for that question, Delegate. Diversity plans are just like you may see on local or county grant process, is looking at how diverse the employees that are working. We want the employees on Maryland contracts to be representative of the Maryland workforce. So it looks at exactly how you are splitting it up. So there's no specific goals that you would have to have, but we're looking at it as consideration. Sometimes you may hear of that as prior to the PRA through the economic benefits factor, which could be a myriad of things, but this is looking specifically at the workforce, not necessarily where the business is situated or any other practices.
Okay. And the other question I have is regarding enforcement. You mentioned liquidated damages, but also are there other enforcement, required or ways that you enforce the contracts, or, like disbarments or anything else that are used?
So we have been in conversations with DOSM in regards to what that would look like in regards to like a past performance system that could capture the information per contract to see if that was a repetitive nature, that you're not meeting your goals and you haven't made a good faith effort, you can't show that there were changes that made you miss it, that a vendor would then be debarred. At this time, those conversations are still in play, but as a immediate matter, we went back even in time, looking back at from fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25 to remedy the deficiencies for those contracts. And those are the contracts that we have converted the liquidated damages, basically the dollar for dollar examination, to a debt through the central collections unit.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Of course, ma'am.
Thank you. Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's nice to see you both. Thank you for being here. I just had a couple of questions, and unsurprisingly, based on our previous conversations, they're going to be around audits. So just curious to sort of follow up on the conversation that we had earlier in the fall around the moves from state-owned buildings to rental properties, and was just curious, Mr. Secretary, if you could give us any sort of an update, and I know we'll talk about that more as a committee. Have there been any of the changes that we talked about with the Joint Audit Committee implemented internally on the process on how those assessments are made and the cost-benefit analysis is made?
Yes, great question, Delegate. We are working towards that right now, updating our processes and procedures when they come to cost-benefit analyses and taking into account certain things. As an example, I know OLA had indicated that there were certain instances where certain aspects like purchasing a building may not have been examined, even though we did a full cost-benefit analysis, and taking that into account and actually documenting the fact that we did evaluate that and that was not a viable option. Here are the reasons why. So absolutely putting policies and procedures in place. That way we are able to fully document any type of cost-benefit analysis that we're doing and able to make sure that those are available.
Great. I would just love to follow up with you to see the nuts and bolts of that.
Sure.
And then wanted to just piggyback off of my colleague's question, specifically in reference to the DGS audit that came out in December around the EMA procurements. So on the liquidated damages piece, can you just sort of walk me through, and the committee, how you make the assessment? So you've got a $35 million contract, $32 million of it is paid. It's clear, obviously, some of the systems didn't work correctly. Some of the information that, some of the items that we were supposed to get were not obtained the way that we expected them to be, we as the state. What's the internal process from your agency's assessment? And I appreciate that you're saying that we now have gotten $2 million of liquidated damages against clearly other people, but I think we see this repeated across the board. So I'm curious on the EMA contract, but more broadly, I just feel like I see repeated instances over and over and over again. We've seen it in other agencies. Corrections was the big one that we dealt with last year with the healthcare contract, where we give millions of dollars of state taxpayer money to contractors where we have other options, right? So it's, you know, I'm not worried about not going back to that vendor, right? We have other vendors that can do the same job, and yet we refuse to hold them accountable, literally in instances where we have documented evidence that what they were supposed to give us did not actually materialize in any way, shape, or form, and then we left them off the hook. So what's the process from your agency and more broadly with state government? How do we make the decision to go after these contractors and to make sure that we're recouping taxpayer money? Because again, with corrections, they weren't providing anything that was supposed to be provided for the healthcare. They were grossly missing their targets. And honestly, until the General Assembly raised the point, they weren't going after, and OLA raised the point, they weren't even going after liquidated damages for things that were clearly spelled out in missing their targets.
Delegate, thank you for that question. And to be honest, it's an internal analysis in partnership with the Office of Attorney General, the attorneys that are dedicated to the Department of General Services. We look at the facts and circumstances based on that specific contract. For the contract that you're referencing, is looking at the requirements at time, what work actually did ensue, what work was subcontracted out, what was their particular plan at that time, and what type of evidence do we have in regards to good faith effort that has been submitted by that vendor, and what type of information we have in regards to the management of contract, any changes that the government may have necessitated. The one thing and challenge with good faith effort, it's very subjective. It depends on what work actually matriculated and what exactly was requested, that interchange between the government and the vendor through contract management. We take that information, we provide it, and we have a conversation with our attorneys, and through consultation, we make a determination on how to proceed.
Is there any additional review, or is it once the internal agency, internal office makes a decision, that's pretty much it?
Well, this could be something that the Attorney General wants to pick up as litigation. They make a determination on how much evidence and what information is available. We have to take the advice of our attorneys, because at that point, when we start going after liquidated damages, there's no statute at this point that we're aware of that has any administrative appeal features. So it's either determining that there's an automatic debt if we believe we have enough evidence to do so, or it's referring over to the Attorney General's office and they make a determination if they want to go after or pursue legal damages, basically the liquidated damages, to enforce that contract.
So it's my understanding from talking to the Attorney General that their team usually takes the lead of the agencies. That the agencies say, we believe we haven't gotten, they then go forward with legal action, then it's usually not the Attorney General that makes the decision. So I think maybe we should have some conversations offline about whether there's an additional tweak and sort of oversight that we would want to do. Because again, this is, it seems just repeated over and over and over again in audit findings that when agencies are not getting what they're supposed to be getting, we then let the vendors and the contractors off the hook. The last question, Madam Chair, just again, one of the other things that came up in the audit was an issue with administrative fees and not getting those properly. The audit identified, just this audit, identified about $2 million in administrative fees. So is that an issue that we're not getting paid appropriately, or the provision had not been included in contracts appropriately? I know in the response you said that the system is going to be implemented digitally by 2027 to sort of just standardize that across the board. But what has been the problem, and what are we doing in the interim before the new system is up and running to fix it? And can we reclaim any of the administrative fees that we hadn't been getting prior?
So it's been a manual process, and that is something that we're continuing to work with. So right now, we have internal milestones for us to determine which contracts would be eligible. Is there something that for contracts that did not have that requirement in it? Because again, it's manually put in, it's not a system that puts in that specific term and condition. At the state, there are templates that are utilized. If somehow that term was not put into a contract, we would have to work with council to make a determination if it could be, the word in the federal government is the Christian doctrine, but it's that it would be put in the contract even though it was not in the contract at time of solicitation. So that's another thing between the partnership with the agency and council on whether we'd be able to go after those vendors, even though it may not have made it to the contract at the time the contract was actually let. For the ones that have the fee in there, we are collecting those fees, but again, it's a manual process, so we are looking through our accounting to see exactly if there were missed fees, and we are making arrangements to then better that process to make sure we're collecting it.
Do you have an accounting yet of what we may have not collected, or even just a total accounting of administrative fees and where they're supposed to be?
So we are reaching out for support from a contractor to provide some of those services because we want to make sure everything that is owed to the department is provided to the department.
How much is that contract? Do you have any idea?
No, that's what we are working through right now.
Okay. All right. I'd love to follow up with you on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Tomlinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You talked a little bit about like that. It's January and I'm like over here sweating. I had no idea where that was coming from. Thank you.
Delegate, if you're hot, you can accompany us at the polar bear plunge tomorrow with Capitol Police. We're happy to have you come join us.
It's the only way, it's all the stress out here. It's killing me. You talked a little bit about the contract management training program you guys have. Are you seeing that procurement officers are taking it, or the actual folks who are managing the contracts?
No, that's a good question, but we can follow back up. I want to get you exact information. We can get a survey of it.
Yeah, because it would be good if the folks that were actually managing the contracts are doing it, because I know that a lot of times there's a confusion over who's managing the contracts, and sometimes people think it's procurement officers, and it's not the case. There's an actual assigned contract manager. So it's great you guys created the program. Now it's just got to get it in the hands of the people managing the contracts.
And there's multiple layers, obviously, as you're well aware, Delegate, of contract management. So the more we can get folks trained and involved, and especially at the program level, because they're the ones dealing with a contractor every day, that's really critical and key. While we're Office of State Procurement, we've got contract management here, but I always see that as more advanced. So if on the program level they can address it, then they would escalate up as may be deemed appropriate. So that's where we want to make sure we're focusing on the training.
I don't think did you guys mention the procurement timeline milestone tool you guys came out with? I don't think.
So we do have, as part of the executive order, there's a milestone tool that is in play now that previously it was about 277 days to award for our most robust procurement. So this is when you heard about the competitive seal proposals or request for proposals, where from inception all the way through Board of Public Works, it was 277 days. We've taken that time to say from complete procurement package to recommended award. We've gotten that down about 70% operationally, 34% by policy. So the goal is from 277 days to 120 days, but we've actually even exceeded that at this point.
All right, thank you.
No, of course.
Yes, you can turn back on your fan. Thank you. Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary, I just say from Howard County, welcome to our committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So I dive into the whole conversation. I think that I have one question for you. How many contracts do you manage, in the whole department? What's the most challenging issue you feel, to manage those contracts and make sure they will be executed? For example, to a certain degree, you feel that has been fulfilled to the contract purpose.
So great question. I'll start and also I'll hand off to you. I think there's, we were just talking with Delegate Thompson, I think it's the multiple levels of contract management. And ensuring that, to Delegate Thompson's point, it's a clear distinction and delineation that procurement officers, while they manage the procurement and they handle it, they're not monitoring the contracts moving forward. And there's often a misconception at the program level who are actually dealing with the vendor and contractor receiving the goods and services that they also should be monitoring that contract. That in and of itself has been a challenge over many, many years. As an example, not properly monitoring their contract, they overrun the contract, meaning they overspend and they go over their limit. Now we have a retroactive contract. Or they go outside of scope without closely monitoring their scope. So there's a lot of challenges associated with at the program level that they should be managing up, and knowing when, if you would need to escalate up at a contract management level, escalate up to, as an example, Office of Procurement that can help them navigate any type of contract modifications or issues that do come up. So quite a few, obviously lots of contracts across the state, some of them very, very complex, but it's under this administration building that contract management capability across state governments so we're better monitoring contract and better managing state resources. So anything I've left out?
The Secretary captured it in his response pretty well. The only piece I add is historically the state has not done contract management. This is probably for decades. The state has done contract monitoring, but truly contract management where it's a team concept, where you have the procurement officer that's assigned to the specific contract, and you have the program counterpart, because that's the individual that can say whether the services or the products being received are to the quality as the requirement specified. So, but from a contract term standpoint, you still have the procurement officer. So it's a team assigned to the contract. So we're building that infrastructure for the state, but historically the state has never had such.
Madam Chair, follow-up question? Quick, right. So
quickly, please. Thank you.
When do you think your new management system will come online or be working?
So that's a two-part answer, Delegate. One is the system itself that we're working on, which will provide tools and triggers where you're unable to run past the budgetary amount that's established, the ceiling of the contract. The other part is really more change management and is getting statewide adoption to contract management principles. So I can't give a definitive time at this point, but we are progressing towards it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Delegate Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Appreciate it. My question is, when you mentioned liquidated damages, I presume that's because the contract kind of blew up and didn't work out, generally speaking, right?
Oh, no, is a specific provision in the contract, liquidated damages. So there are goals that were set at the onset of the contract that the contractor is obligated to meet. However, it's a good faith effort because if they were changing, whether it was site conditions or other changes to that, it wasn't as it was originally anticipated. If something, I believe it was mentioned in the previous presentation, if the vendor that they had planned to use, all of a sudden they have capacity issues and they can no longer do that, no longer be utilized, we wouldn't hold that against the contractor either. Some services, like construction is generally set for, it's generally straightforward. You know what's coming down the pipeline, but some things, especially in the services space, things may change. And as things evolve, the originally anticipated goals will need to be changed. That's actually why we put in the Procurement Reform Act the ability to increase goals, because we look at that in both directions. If now there's more subcontractable opportunities, we want to increase that goal as well. At that point, since the contract's already established, it's a bilateral change until we get to option period, and that might be the basis for increasing.
Where I was leading the question is I'm just curious, what category does there seem to be the most fail in? When you let contracts, there's an RFP, and then you have the responses, and there's the scope of work, and there's an awardee. In what category are there the most? Is it IT? Is it construction?
That would be a manual pull. We don't have systems that would pull to that degree. Federal government doesn't even have that type of capability. Okay. So we would have to manually pull it because those particular, you could have let me make it a little clearer. You could have a contract for a specific service. So let's say we're categorizing this as information technology services, but the portion of the contract that is considered a commercially useful function that the goal is tied to may be something different. So I couldn't even look at the category of the contract itself. I have to look at the actual subcontracting portion of it. So that's a manual pull. We wouldn't have a system to extract that data.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I want to thank Secretary Chowdhury and Mr. Sermons for your presentation. As you know, this has drawn a lot of interest from folks across, from all the committee as well as others outside of the committee. So we are looking forward to working with you all to continue to make sure that DGS operates in a way that's beneficial to the state of Maryland. And so thank you very much for being direct with your responses today, and we look forward to further discussion and how we can work together. So thank you for being here this afternoon. Have a great day.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And that adjourns our briefing.